Thanks very much for joining us.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Let's start right on Israel. Your administration has described Prime Minister Netanyahu's plans to address Congress tomorrow on Iran as destructive. What damage has really been done?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to realize the depth of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Under my administration, billions of dollars have gone to support Israel's security, including the Iron Dome program that has protected them from missiles firing along their borders. The military and intelligence cooperation is unprecedented. That's not our estimation. That's the estimation of the Netanyahu government. And that bond is unbreakable. And so we need to make clear from the outset how strong our alliance with Israel is. The second point is that we actually share a goal, which is making sure Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. That's something that I committed to when I was still a senator. It was a solemn pledge that I made before I was elected president, and everything that I've done over the course of the last several years in relation to Iran has been in pursuit of that policy.
But let's talk a little bit specifically about the Prime Minister. Susan Rice said what he has done by accepting the invitation to speak was destructive to the fabric of the relationship. Would you agree that it's destructive? And if so, will there be any consequences for him or for Israel?
You know, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is sincere about his concerns with respect to Iran. And given Iran's rhetoric, given the extraordinarily disruptive and dangerous activities of this regime in the region, it's understandable why Israel is very concerned about Iran. We are too. But what we've consistently said is we have to stay focused on our ultimate goal, which is preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Now, as a matter of policy, we think it's a mistake for the Prime Minister of any country to come to speak before Congress a few weeks before they're about to have an election. It makes it look like we are taking side. I don't think it's permanently destructive. I think that it is a distraction from what should be our focus. And our focus should be, how do we stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? Now, keep in mind, the Prime Minister, when we signed up for this interim deal that would essentially freeze Iran's program, roll back its highly enriched uranium, its 20% highly enriched uranium, and so reduce the possibility that Iran might break out while we were engaged in these negotiations. When we first announced this interim deal, Prime Minister Netanyahu made all sorts of claims. This was going to be a terrible deal. This was going to result in Iran getting $50 billion worth of relief. Iran would not abide by the agreement. None of that has come true. It's turned out that, in fact, during this period, we've seen Iran not advance its program. In many ways, it's rolled back elements of its program, and we've gotten more insight into what they're doing with more vigorous inspections than even the supporters of an interim deal suggested. So the question is this: if, in fact, we are trying to finalize a deal, why not wait to see, A, is there actually going to be a deal? Can Iran accept the terms that we're laying out? If, in fact, Iran can accept terms that would ensure a one-year breakout period for 10 years or longer, and during that period, we know Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. We have inspectors on the ground that give us assurances that they're not creating a covert program. Why would we not take that deal when we know the alternatives, whether through sanctions or military actions, will not result in as much assurance that Iran's developing a nuclear weapon? There's no good reason for us not to let the negotiations play themselves out. And then we'll show, here's the deal that's been negotiated. Does it make sense? And I am confident that if, in fact, a deal is arrived at, that it's going to be a deal that is most likely to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
You obviously disagree about that. If the Prime Minister wins re-election, will you be able to work with him?
Absolutely. We're working with them now on a whole range of issues.
Will you meet with them?
Of course. As I said before, the only reason that We didn't meet with him this time. As a general policy, we don't meet with somebody 2 weeks before an election. I've met with Prime Minister Netanyahu more than any other world leader. And given the strong relationship between the United States and Israel, I would expect that to continue.
Is it fair to say you're angry with them?
This is not a personal issue. I think that it is important for every country in its relationship with the United States to recognize that the U.S. has a process of making policy. And although we have separation of powers, ultimately the interaction with foreign governments runs through the executive branch. That's true whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president, and that's true regardless of how close the ally is.
Have Israel's actions been destructive to the ability to get this deal?
I think that it's been a distraction. I think that in the meantime, negotiators are going full speed ahead. Ultimately, what's been remarkable is the international unity we've been able to maintain in saying to Iran, you have to show the world that you are not pursuing a nuclear weapon. You can have very modest enrichment capabilities for peaceful use so long as there is a vigorous enough inspection process that we have assurances that you are not obtaining breakout capacity. And the biggest challenge right now to getting a deal is for Iran to recognize this is its path in order to ultimately re-enter into the community of nations. I'm less concerned, frankly, with Prime Minister Netanyahu's commentary than I am with Congress taking actions that might undermine the talks before they're completed. And what I've said to members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, is there will be plenty of time for us to reapply sanctions, strengthen sanctions, to take a whole range of other measures if, in fact, we do not have a deal. But what we should not do is prejudge the deal and initiate sanctions that might allow Iran to walk away and claim that, in fact, the United States is the one that has eliminated the path of diplomacy.